He is a content producer with over 8 years experience who has worked on 50 plus podcasts. And so we're about to ask him all of the questions. Yes? Are we ready with the questions? Now, Wiswa, please come join me on stage. Please clap for him. Let's be happy. Sorry, I didn't turn it on. Thank you. Okay, how are you?
I'm good.
You are good?
Yes.
Okay, so I only gave your first name.
Yes.
Because I usually like to start my conversations in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Introduce yourself to us as if we are people who have never heard of you, because I feel like sometimes what I think is important is not necessarily what you think is important. I might want to say you're a content producer for 8 years and you want to say like you're a husband or a father, you know. Amen. So please introduce yourself to us.
Okay, hi guys. Hi, come on, a bit more psych. Hi guys. Hi, so my name is Nabiso Wanyama, as I've been introduced. Yes, I'm a content producer. I do videography, I do audio, I do photos, and basically, generally, I'm in media. I've been doing this for about 8 years. Started mainly as a sound engineer, actually as a music producer, then a sound engineer, did a lot of voiceover work, worked in a lot of Nairobi studios, then transitioned into video. Once I saw audio and video kind of always go hand in hand, and most times there's a demand for video. So I'm glad to be here today, and I'm hoping you have all the questions and I can help you progress or start your podcasting journey. Nice to meet you.
Amazing. Thank you for the introduction. So I wanted to find out, you say you've been in production from music coming into audio video. What is it that inspired you to go into production specifically?
Wow, that's a long story. I think as most of us know, when we grow up as kids, there are usually these 3 careers that we need to focus on, and definitely sound or doing podcast isn't really one of them. But so initially I actually started I have background in law. I started in law school, reached 4th year, dropped out.
In 4th year?
Yes, in 4th year.
Okay, are your parents okay?
Lord knows, they're here. They're streaming. Yeah, then, so I'd say I got into audio as a matter of necessity, if I'm being completely honest. And so when I was trying to figure out what I'm doing next post my law school, one thing I was really good at is music, and I was kind of into events at that time. And so the first thing I did with my old laptop is just kind of start making music and got into music production. And so music production was fun and all, but again, really in terms of a demand, in terms of kind of being able to make money out of it, it's an okay career, but really needs to put in a lot of effort to kind of scale it. And so as I was doing the music, I kind of started moving towards voiceovers, excuse me. And so with the voiceovers, I started just working for simple things. Even maybe someone is launching a butchery and they need a voiceover, or these ones you hear in town for Airtel. That's just random voiceovers. And with that, at least I found a bit of stability in a business sense, because now with the voiceovers, at least you'd get paid for recording these voiceovers. And so, I think the turning point for me was kind of now choosing to pursue like a diploma in sound engineering. And main reason I did this was to kind of just be able to tap into the market, because I wasn't really finding maybe with mentors or someone who can kind of help me get into this sound engineering space. And so I did my diploma at ADMI, which went really well. Then once I was done with that, kind of when I was doing my internship, I got posted at a really nice studio, one of, I think, the best studios in Nairobi. It's called AMP Studios. It's at Mirage Towers. And so from there, I kind of now continued specializing in sound engineering. Then after some time, because I did have an entrepreneurial spirit, and so what happened is, after some time, as I was working in the studio, I still had a few of my things going on. I still had my own tiny music studio, though I was working in a big studio. And so the more I worked, the more I still felt the passion to just kind of do my own thing. And so I went on doing voiceovers, was fortunate to get a few like life-changing gigs, so maybe doing like some voiceover for a banking app for INM, and doing some voiceover for some startups. And so from there, it was actually at that point where I noticed, well, the demand for audio always comes with video. So you'll rarely find a client just asking you to do audio for them. And so got into the video space, just got one camera at a time. And actually what made me get into podcasts is I was working on Wangari's podcast. So initially, before she rebranded, just very early. And I was just there as a friend, honestly, just watching her do her podcast. And then she used to get her podcast content, and she wasn't really like happy with the results. She was like, maybe there's so much more to be done. No hate to whoever edited. I'm just being honest. Yeah, and so to me, I was always like, wow, I'm sure I can do what you're saying you need. And so through her journey, I kind of noticed, wow, there's kind of a niche here for podcasts, and not just podcasts, but quality production and more so quality editing and delivering. And so this kind of came full circle where maybe after 6 months and getting a few more gear, I started shooting her content. Then from her being my first client, I kind of now branched out and kind of started satisfying that podcast niche, which was really growing. Yep. So that was kind of my summary.
Okay, I like a summary. But I like how much detail you've put in, because you've given us, you've let us know that you actually did it in school, which I feel like a lot of podcasters don't go to school for audio engineering. And I feel like a lot of the people who will be watching wouldn't necessarily have the knowledge, which is why I think it was very important for you to come. So in your experience, what's the most common mistakes that you see that podcasters make when picking the equipment? So we're talking just like, even if it's your phone, what is the mistake you feel like a lot of podcasters make from a professional standpoint?
Okay, so I think this question honestly has two answers. So I'll give you the technical answer first. The first mistake I think most podcasters make is, I think, first assuming that you need a lot of gear to start your podcast. But actually, what you need to start your podcast is good content. So you thinking about gear first is kind of a bad way to plan out your content or your podcast journey. And so, I mean, on the technical aspects, I'd say that there are, I think, which we'll mention later, there are a few types of mics, the types of microphones you choose, where you choose to shoot your podcast. All these things kind of play a role in terms of getting quality content. And as you've said, I mean, you can even easily shoot your podcast with your phone as long as it's an okay phone and you have good lighting. But the first mistake people make is assuming you need a lot of gear. And so people most time end up spending a lot of money on gear. They don't know how to use the gear. And then now they kind of get frustrated where you've spent 50K on gear, you've spent 20K on an editor, you go to YouTube, you have 10 views. And then you're asking yourself, hey, my Lord, is this what being a podcaster is all about? Yeah. And so for me, what I'd say initially is actually the first mistake you'd make is thinking you want to buy gear. That's your first mistake. Mm-hmm. Your first mistake is actually assessing, why do you want to start a podcast? Assessing your niche, like this niche I'm going into, is it art? Is it food? Is it whatever? Is there a demand? What are other podcasters in this space experiencing? Are they thriving? Is this something? And again, I think a really important thing is you need to think as a podcast. I always tell someone, when they tell me they're starting a podcast, I tell them, no, you're starting a business.
Yes.
It's just a business like any other. You can say it's a podcast, put all the makeup, but it's just any other business. And as you said, you talked about gear. So what does that mean? You're investing. Mm-hmm. And so if you're investing, you need to think about it as a business. So I think that I would say that's the first mistake people make.
Okay. So you mentioned mics. When I'm starting, what are the mics I should think about? Is there a difference in, say, I have a solo podcast, if I have an interview podcast, if I'm doing a round table, are there considerations I need to make? And outside of it being very like studio forward, if I'm in my house and I have my phone, what are the considerations? Should I get the Bluetooth mic? What works?
Yeah, so if you're in the house and let's say you have a budget of 5K, let's say you have your phone, and you have 5K and you're like, I want to start this podcast. What I'd say is the first thing you do is first set up where you're shooting. Your room needs to be a very good soundproofed room. If it's not soundproofed, soundproofing can be simple. Of course, you'd go to someone and be like, add soundproofing panels. But soundproofing can be as easy as hanging blankets around where you're shooting, depending if it's audio or video. But so in the context of video, if you had 5,000, there's this, and I mean, I can share these things post the interview, but they're very cheap. The good thing about podcasting nowadays, there's very cheap equipment that gives you good quality, that a listener wouldn't know the difference between a 60,000 microphone and a 5K. So there's a popular company called Fifine, I think, Fifine. And they have a package for a mic, which is 5,000. And so the mic comes with a boom arm, so the thing that holds the mic, and it comes with like USB. So you can put it directly to your computer. And if your phone is optimized, you can even plug it straight to your phone. And so if you're recording at home, if you don't have a lot of noise, you can use a lapel mic. So lapel mics is what you see most of these media guys use, and they are kind of on the cheaper range of things. So you can find a lapel mic as cheap as 3,000, 4,000, and be able to plug it in, plug it direct to your phone, and record. The slightly higher is now what I'm talking about. It's called a Fifine, and that's basically a dynamic mic. So same type of mic like this, but the difference with the dynamic mic is it kind of isolates a lot of noise. So the downside of what I call the lapel mic or lavalier mic is it tends to take all the noise in the room. So if you're in a noisy place or a noisy neighborhood, or you have family members around, then that lapel mic will not work in your favor. But if you kind of have that dynamic microphone, that will go a long way in kind of building up. For the more higher range, they're called condenser microphones, and these are like studio level microphones. For these ones, you really need a quiet place because these mics are very sensitive. And so any noise, even AC, any type of noise, the microwave. So you're in a podcast, after you go to edit, you're hearing the microwave is ringing or the oven. So you wouldn't want those condenser mics. So I'd say lavalier mic or lapel mics or the dynamic microphones to start with.
Okay, and talking about mics, you've spoken about having the corded one with the USB and whatever, and sometimes some of them are Bluetooth.
Yeah.
Is there a preference when it comes to them, and what are the considerations for the people who are buying them?
So if you're shooting mostly indoors, and again, depending on your budget, but if you're shooting mostly indoors, you don't need the wireless one. And with the wireless one, they're often more expensive. So the cheapest you're getting a wireless quality Bluetooth, maybe from Rode or DJI, you're getting them for 15K, 20K. But the good thing with this wireless ones, or even there are some which are, I'd say, wireless, where they kind of have a small transmitter, so you can just plug it into your phone. But so if you're starting, I'd say start with the one that you just plug directly into your phone, because again, it's cheaper. The good thing with the Bluetooth one is if you're planning on shooting outside, or maybe you're doing podcasts and a hybrid of vlogging, then that would serve you much better, because now with distance, you can have that space. And also, for example, if you're maybe interviewing someone, you've seen enough times somebody's using one lapel and they're going back and forth. Yeah, so I think that's the context for that.
Okay, and when I'm picking the mic, whether it's Bluetooth, corded or not, what are the considerations? You know how they have the specs? I don't know technical terms.
Yep.
So what happens to people like me who want to start a podcast and we want to be like, I want to get a mic that's not a condenser mic, so that it doesn't pick everything. What are the things we need to look at that would help us in that consideration?
Okay, so first, of course, I've been in the space for long, but with the internet, I'd say nowadays it's much easier to research products, right? And so, of course, I'd tell you, if you go to a shop or if you search online, look for a dynamic microphone or look for a lapel mic. But one thing you also have to accept, especially with audio, cheap is expensive. So, of course, if you are to ask me, I would not advise you to buy a 3K lapel microphone. I'd be like, just break the bank. Even if it's a 10K lapel, at least you know it will serve you for maybe a year or so before you need to upgrade, right? And so for most people, that's basically what I'd say. Like, don't buy the cheap ones. Or these ones you see in Amazon, it's a mic, it's gold plated, but it's 3K. Like, you'll just sound like you're in a Mabati house. And so you'll buy it and you get home and you will press record and you're like, what the hell did I just buy? Yeah. And so I'd say good mics, let's say 5K going up, is why it's a good base to start off. So let's say between 5K and 15K, there you're getting value for money in terms of the microphone you're buying. And at that price point, things like sensitivity or like the quality, unfortunately, at that price point, don't really matter because they're kind of on the same base. But though personally, there are definitely brands that I can recommend. Yeah.
Okay, please send us the list. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, I can definitely.
So I wanted to find out: is there specific gear you would recommend for a podcaster who's starting to get? Like, you should have a mic, something, and something else. Is there anything you would
Is
consider?
this just audio or both audio and video?
I'd say do both,
Yep.
because the thing is, some people are fighting the video. Some people are just like, I want to be audio only, and we must respect them.
I agree, but just to start off, that's one thing I'd say. Like, unfortunately, in this day and age, and I don't know if we are allowed to involve the crowd, but like, how
Yes,
many
we
of
can.
us listen to audio podcasts? Just by a show of hands. Okay, 3. And from those 3, how many of you listen to at least more than 5 audio podcasts loyally? Okay, so that's not a bad number, but as you can see, it's not the majority. And unfortunately, if you look at most Kenyans, so again, maybe depends with your niche, but for most Kenyans, they consume, and most of Kenyans, most people consume content visually. And so the reality is, yes, it's fair enough to do audio podcasts, but if you're really bent on growing and kind of leveraging your content, doing video is necessary. And even if you're doing audio, you kind of have to find ways of, if you're posting on social media, you can't just post a voice note. So you have to add like either visuals or captions to kind of give your audio more life. So that's just the first thing I'd say. Like, if you can't do both, try do both. But if you're starting with audio, well and good. Just start from that, then you can grow from it. But again, if you're starting a podcast, what I'd say is most important is sound. Sound beats video every day. And an example I'd like to give is, even now, for example, you'd be more interested in hearing me clearly than seeing me clearly. Because the information I'm relaying is from my sound. It's not from my visual cues matter, but it's mainly from how I'm speaking. And even when you're watching a movie, for example, you'd never watch a movie with bad audio. Because audio is what reels you in as a listener. And so if there's one thing you can't compromise in, it's the audio. So getting a good mic, like what I suggested, there's a company called Fifine that gives good mics at around 5K. I can just link that package later. There are a few other companies like Maono. There's one called Maono, and there's one called Audio Technica, which kind of have microphones between that price range of 5 to 15,000. Then once you've started the audio out, and for this again, so there are 2 types of mics. There are XLR mics, the ones which usually have like cables, but then there are these USB mics which are a bit more convenient because they allow you to plug in directly to your laptop or your computer. And so that will probably be your first microphone, again, based on your budget. And so once you've gotten the mic, let's assume you don't have a camera, you're just using your phone. Mics and a light. So once you have a good light, lights fortunately nowadays are quite cheap. Kama ni mbaya unanunua tu a very powerful bulb and you can put a white bed sheet. But they trust me, there are YouTubers who you look at their setup and you're so impressed, but at the back end, they're just improvising a lot with things like reflectors, DIY reflectors and things like that. So for me, I'd say in the case that you're using your phone and you're not budgeting for a camera, your sound is the first priority and then good lighting. Because with good lighting means you have a good image. Yep.
Okay, so you touched on soundproofing earlier. Yep. You've talked about backgrounds, we've talked about blankets. What are the considerations for home podcasters, the people who can't come to you as a professional, for creating the ideal environment at home for recording their podcasts?
Okay, so if you're at home, again, also maybe depending on where you live, let's say you're in a noisy, because that's the worst case scenario, let's say you're in a noisy environment, then the options you have are record very early in the morning or late at night, before even soundproofing. So you're recording your podcast at 10 p.m. when the matatus have gone, well, the guys who are welding have gone home, so the construction guys have gone, so that's the time to record your podcast. And Apart from that, now with regards to soundproofing, again, as I said, soundproofing is very simple. How rooms work is when a room is empty is when echoes exist. And so what you do when I was mentioning things like blankets, so even if you do have blankets, adding things into your room. So for example, if you just have a decent bedroom with your bed and the normal things that are in a room, then your rooms should be okay. You shouldn't have echoes. But if that's not the case, the DIY hack I always give guys is you can record in your wardrobe. So if your wardrobe has space, just open the doors, put a blanket behind you, sit there in a small stool. And that's if it's audio only, of course, then you need good sound. But the other case is now you're trying to soundproof means bringing things into the room, bring chairs, bring carpets, bring blankets, hang blankets on your windows. If there's one thing sound doesn't like, it's glass and tiles. So if you're in a room that's tiled and has a lot of windows, you're definitely going to be hearing a lot of echoes and reverberations, which are not good. So yeah, so best case, if it's an audio, just get into a closet, or if it's your pantry, just if you have a secure bathroom, nobody will know since it's audio. Just put your blankets and keep it going. Yeah.
Okay, and as you say about soundproofing, how important is it for the acoustics or the sound for you as an editor, as a sound engineer? Yeah. What difference does it make on the experience of the people?
Well, I think it's important, but I'd also say, I mean, with the advent of technology, honestly, soundproofing is just as half as important nowadays, if I'm being completely honest. Because nowadays, with a lot of editing softwares and even a lot of free softwares online, you can easily clean background noise, surprisingly. So sometimes I do have audio shoots, and sometimes even nowadays sound engineers were a bit arrogant. So we can be in a noisy place and the client is a bit worried. I'm like, don't worry, because I know there's a lot of AI and tech nowadays which allows us to kind of clean audio. But there are some audio mistakes that you can't clean, for example. And so I think we'll talk about this later. But apart from like your room noise, what you'd call your room noise, there's some things like hisses and buzzes that can be caused by other things, which can really affect your sound, such that even if you have to try clean it with AI or in post-production, it will still affect the general sound. So it is important, but again, it should not stop you from not shooting your podcast. If it's your family members, as I said, just try shoot late at night or early in the morning, and I guess that's the sacrifice you have to make for being a podcaster.
Okay, and for this hissing, sounding, pops, and all of these things, what are the considerations I need to think about? What are the tests, for example, I would be able to do as a podcaster to ensure that at the end, the things that can't be removed have already been sorted?
Yeah, so the first thing, and I mean, I also learned this the hard way a few times when I was starting. The first thing you need to always do as a podcaster is always do like a sound check and a video check. So you can't be the first time you're going to talk is the first time you're working your gear or you're recording. And so essentially what you need to do is like a rough take. So do almost like a 1 minute version of your podcast just to test out the sound. So you press play, press the video, press the audio on, record it. Once you're done, listen back to it. Again, if you're fortunate enough to maybe have headphones, you can do it simultaneously as you're talking. So listen back as you're talking and kind of hear what you're sounding. Other things to consider, again, is things that, especially when you're starting and you're nervous, you kind of tend to forget. So, for example, things like you left the fan on, you left the AC on, maybe your phone is close to your microphone. And so what that means is if a message enters or someone calls you, it gets that car sound, and you're mid-recording, so you're just in a fix. So kind of doing those pre-checks where you test your gear before, and then the other thing would be to kind of make sure surrounding noises, the doors are closed, windows are closed, phone is on do not disturb, and things like your fan and all those things are off before you start shooting. Yep.
Okay, and now for software, you just mentioned it. What is some of the software that you would recommend for podcasters when it comes to editing, both free and professional, especially home podcasters?
So if you're shooting at home, well, there's this free software that's been there for a while. It's called Audacity. So Audacity is actually free. Works well if you're just doing like a solo podcast with 2 or 3 mics. Might get a bit technical, but with YouTube you can easily find a tutorial. And so nowadays I'd actually advise guys, you're kind of doing a hybrid of editing yourself, and if there's tech to help you, let it help you. So for example, there are enough free softwares that allow you to do like noise reduction, noise removal online. So Adobe has one, it's called Adobe Podcast, and there are like 2 or 3 more that I can share, which you just throw your audio in, it will clean it up for you, and you can download it. But for softwares, I'd say Audacity is good. There are some which are there's one called Reaper, so it's kind of free, but like for like a month or so, then you have to pay. Reaper is quite good for semi-pro, so if you're doing like 3 people in a podcast and 4, that one works really well for you. Then for the paid versions, we have the Adobe Audition, we have the DaVinci Resolve, then we have any music making software, so the Logic Pros, the FL Studios, and all that. But I'd advise if you're starting, I think Audacity is good enough, and Audacity can actually allow you to record directly into it, and has kind of easy presets. So you just click a button, and it's called noise reduction, or sometimes they might even have presets for like podcasts. So you just click and it like brightens your voice, makes it nice and balanced. Yeah.
And if I have a video audio podcast,
Yeah.
should I, and this is a question I hear all the time, should I edit my video and extract the audio?
Okay.
Or do you record the video, record the audio, edit both separately?
Okay.
Or how do you, or what considerations, I guess, should you have when you're doing both? Is the audio the same? Do you record the audio separately? What are the considerations?
So if you're doing video and audio, the main thing you need to consider, first of all, I guess that's why videographers exist. Because at the end of the day, if you're doing both and you're trying to edit, there's definitely a bit of a steep learning curve. Because, I mean, you can do it, but it will just take some time for you to get the hang of it. But ideally, what I'd suggest, so for example, if you're using your phone, as I talked about, if you're plugged into your to your phone, you'd find that the video already has the audio inside it. But if you're recording separately, you'll have to do what is called syncing. So syncing means you take the audio, you take the video, but now you have to go into a software, so a video editing software like Premiere Pro or DaVinci, and now put the audio and video together. Luckily, nowadays, most of these video softwares have that feature. So you just, so the key thing you need to do is if you're synchronizing, that's what I mean, is anytime you're starting your podcast, you need to. And what that clap does basically is once you enter the video editing software, you can see where the clap is. And so what you're actually doing is aligning the clap at the video and the clap at the audio to be at the same time. And that means now your video will be synced. Again, with most of these softwares, you can just select both and just click auto sync, and it does it for you. Yeah.
Okay. And if I decide to use the video's audio, are there considerations I need to make when editing directly from video? Because some people will have a video podcast, but have it available on audio platforms as well, right? So I'm on YouTube, but I'm on AfriPod, Spotify, Apple, name it. So when I'm editing it, what are there specific considerations I need to have as a podcaster doing both video and audio and editing directly from my video?
Okay, so I'm assuming even if you're saying the editing directly from your video, it still has the good quality audio.
It has good quality.
Okay,
so we've used the mics that we discussed, hopefully.
Okay. So I think the only consideration you'd have is, for example, little things would change, for example, like maybe your intro. So let's say if your video had a longer trailer, like giving you snippets of the podcast, for your audio, maybe you'd trim it down to, so maybe a video had a 1 minute trailer. For the audio, it'd be maybe 30 seconds. And then in the case that there are things that you're referring to that are maybe visual, then you need to have that foresight when you're recording to kind of hint to the guys listening to audio about almost like explain what's happening on the video. Otherwise, they'll just be like, okay, what's funny? So you kind of need to always have that context of like, oh, audio guys are listening to this. And so the preparation is kind of when you're shooting, have that foresight to know that you also have an audio audience and they need to be kept in the loop. But apart from that, they'd be pretty much the same.
Okay, and are there things that would help in making podcasting editing efficient when it comes to production? So are there considerations I need to have in the process before that will make my editing faster?
The only thing I'd advise, and I think it works for pretty much everything in life, it's kind of having templates. So, for example, especially initially when you're planning your podcast, you already need to have templates for that. So, kind of have a structure for it. And so, when it comes, once you have that structure, it goes a long way in terms of, especially with the structuring of your podcast, it goes a long way because you have to edit less. Because when you don't plan your podcast well, you end up talking a lot. And when you talk a lot, and then sometimes it's not interesting hearing your voice when you're editing. I think actually most guys kind of hate it. Sure. But so when you kind of structure your podcast well, it means most of the things you're saying are intentional. And so when it comes to editing, you don't have to waste so much time cutting off things where you're like, I was blabbering, I was talking too much. So that's kind of the first step, which is pre-production. Secondly, once you kind of get the hang of video editing and audio, you can also have templates for your audio. So for example, with this video editing apps and also the audio editing apps, you can have presets. So for example, with every audio, you have to EQ. So EQ is equalization. And basically this means it's kind of just cleaning your audio up. So removing bad frequencies, removing low frequencies, and kind of making it sound good. And the other thing is called compression, which is again is a bit technical, but basically what compression does is evens out the sound. So sometimes when you're talking, you can be talking like this, then you're talking like this, and then you're back like this, which is a bit loud. And so what the compression software does exactly is it kind of evens it out. And so all through it sounds like your voice and your levels are balanced. And so if you're using video editing software and you've done them once, all those things allow you to save these presets. And so next time when you bring in your video, you're not doing it from scratch. It's the same voice. So you just click the preset and you're good to go. And same thing comes when you're even maybe correcting like the color in your video. You can easily save those presets. And so when it comes to editing, you just throw them, put the presets, export. Yep.
Okay. Now, I have a lot of podcasters who use Zoom, Riverside, things like that. When you're getting a guest, that's their main thing for recording. Yeah. Are there any specific considerations that they should have using a platform like Zoom or Riverside or whatever it is, Google Meet, to do their podcast?
I'd say the only downside, I know Riverside is quite okay. Even Zoom is not bad, but most times their audio is not great. I think the Riverside is quite fine because that's kind of their niche of kind of allowing you to do remote interviews. But again, it's just kind of going to the settings and again, needs a bit of research. So that's just the podcasting journey. But so when you go to the settings and they usually have audio settings for Zoom, try pick the highest quality audio. So they kind of give you options. They're like MP3, WAV, a lot of technical bitrate and all those things. But just try make sure you're clicking the highest audio quality possible. And that means so that when you download the videos and the audio files, you're working with the best quality that you can. Aside from that, I don't think there's really much you can do. I think Zoom works pretty well, of course, because I think with Riverside, at some point you kind of have to pay for some things. But with Zoom, I know you can record, is it 45 minutes or so? But again, just make sure you're picking the highest audio quality. I think that's the best advice I can give you.
Okay. And if I have a podcast where I'm interviewing someone, what are the considerations, or is there a list of things I need to be able to give them for them to for it to be ensured that the audio on their side is great? And I ask this because we had an experience on our podcast where it was fine when we were talking.
Yeah.
And then when we went to edit, it was a disaster. And if it's a situation where you have an interview with someone who you can't call back.
It was a one-time thing.
Yeah, so what are the considerations I need to have as maybe a list for my guests?
There are two ways of approaching this. So if you have the microphone, as I mentioned, let's say you have that USB mic. If you're doing a remote interview, you can use that mic. So for example, you're using Zoom. If your mic is plugged into your computer or even your phone, then you can actually go to the settings and replace your computer mic with the mic that you've bought. And so that by default ensures the quality of the mic, because recording with laptop mics, unless it's I don't know, maybe these new Macs, I haven't tried them, but like recording with laptop mics generally is just a bad idea. They take noise, they're very bad. And again, if anything happens, if you get a notification, it's just a bad idea. And so what you'd also try tell the other person, if they're in a situation where they have a mic, they can plug in that mic and use that mic in place of their laptop mic. If not, the only other thing they can do again is give them those soundproofing hacks I was saying. So record in a quiet place, soundproof the room, cover it with blankets, do all the necessary things that you need to make sure not a lot of noise is bleeding into the audio. Yep.
Okay, based on your experience
Yep.
with the 50 podcasts that you've worked on,
Yeah.
with the 8 years that you've worked in the
Yeah.
industry, are there specific issues that you've seen podcasters experience around audio editing and things like that?
Yeah.
What are they, and what are the solutions based on your experience?
Well, I mean, I think just from my observation, podcasters, yes, do experience a lot of issues. And I mean, they're the technical issues, and I'm hoping if some get to say their experiences, they can share some of the issues that they experience. But I think most issues, unfortunately, stem from poor planning. So as I said, if you didn't kind of test out your audio before, test out your video before, plan your script if you have one, or like a guideline before, then you tend to get a situation where a lot of mistakes are happening to you as you're shooting, and you kind of just give up and upload. And so apart from those, I could say like the technical problems would be you're too loud, or your voice is too soft. And so with this equipment, they usually come with like some places that you can dial the volume. And so if, let's say you've bought a mic like the one I described, usually the rule of thumb with us sound guys is if you bought a mic, this is the distance you should be away from the mic. So if you have a mic, so almost, okay, my fingers are a bit long, but like we say 6 inches is a good base for you to kind of be away from your mic. And while you're here, you're still being audible. So you can't be here. Yeah, so you just, exactly. Okay. So you can't be here and you're whispering. And again, the only exception is if you're in a noisy place, then you'd advise you to bring close, but not too close. So the closer you get, the deeper your voice becomes. And so if you're a dude, you might end up sounding too bassy, which is not good. And if you're a chick also, it might kind of distort your voice, because when you're talking from here, you know, it doesn't sound as cogent as here. And more importantly, and that's why as sound engineers, we really hate when artists do this, because you can see what it does to microphones. So kind of holding it 6 inches is a good sign, but with that 6 inches, make sure you're audible and clear. So that will help save you from being too loud. And also be audible in terms of, because the moment you're always soft-spoken, so you're speaking like this, what happens is, when you go to boost your audio, you'll boost it with all the noise around you. So you might think, see, just add volume. But then when you go to add the volume, you find that now you're bringing up, because you're not recording maybe in a perfect room, you'll bring up all the noise. And so try always be audible and keep that mic in a decent position. And that's the beauty of doing like a take before. So when you do the take before, you're able to be like, okay, this audio is good, I can record. Yep.
Okay, now we've talked about soundproofing, we've talked about having your family sleep. However, if we're honest, a lot of times we don't have the best situations, setups in order to do podcasts. If you guys watch Over 25, there used to be a jogo every time they start recording that would just start going off. So if I'm in a situation like that, what are the things you would advise? Do I just make it ambient sounds and tell my people there's a jogo in the background, or are there things that I can do with the technical work that would be able to help?
Yeah, so of course, if you're a startup podcaster, I am not telling you to go start tweaking that audio in a software, because honestly, you'll probably make it sound worse. So again, there are some things, if there are things which are outside your control, like a cock crowing or something like that, sometimes you just have to accept. The alternative, and that's why I'm saying we are lucky in this day and age, to be honest, with AI and you can just go look at examples. Like with AI, you can even record a podcast in a matatu. And it won't sound perfect, but it will definitely isolate the noise and you'll sound like you're not there. So again, I'll share the different AI platforms that you can use to just throw your audio, and things like a cock crowing or your neighbor hooting or the microwave. Those are things that you can get rid of using tech nowadays. So
Can you mention some of them, even though we'll have them in the show notes?
yeah, so I think the easiest and the free one that I know is called Adobe Podcast. So it's called Adobe Podcast AI. So it's just a cleaner and just allows you to throw your audio into I guess you probably have to sign up and things like those. And you put your audio there, takes like 5 minutes or so, gives you clean audio. And then with the paid version of it, gives you you can be able to vary how much noise is being removed. Because sometimes when you remove too much noise, it also sounds unnatural because our ears perceive sound differently. And so at no point it doesn't feel nice when you're just hearing the audio alone. As you said, maybe now the ambience. And so sometimes if you maybe put too much noise reduction, you might need to add ambience again to kind of make it sound normal. Yeah, but there are a few examples that I said the built-in software, even Audacity itself has an inbuilt noise removal or noise gating software. Same to Adobe. All these softwares do have a noise reduction aspect to it. Yeah, but the easiest one that I can recommend is the Adobe one. Very easy to use.
Okay. Technical skills or the idea of technical production is very overwhelming for a lot of people.
Sure.
So, what would your advice be to a podcaster who's thinking of starting and is overwhelmed by the idea of the editing part of it or the production part of it? Because the truth is, a lot of podcasters in the market are the production house themselves.
Yeah, you're everything.
You are everything. You're the host, you're
the social media manager.
Social media, you're script writer, you're doing everything.
Yeah.
So for the technical side, what advice would you have for someone who feels overwhelmed at the concept of it? Because a lot of the people in the audience today don't have podcasts, are thinking of starting them.
Okay, I don't want to sound too negative, right? But if you're overwhelmed already, maybe you're in the wrong business, because podcasting is not an easy business. Let me just be real with you. I think you've done podcasts. It's not easy. And so, I mean, depending on the nuances, I always tell guys, if you can outsource, if it's in your capacity to outsource, because that will allow you to be more creative. So outsource the technical stuff, find a video editor, find someone like me, find someone maybe you know in that space who can help you with that work. If not, as I said, initially there's definitely that steep learning curve. And so if you're starting alone, you're doing the syncing, you have to go on Canvas, you to make a banner, make a thumbnail. So ideally, that's the learning curve you have to go through. But I always say once you're kind of done with like the first 10 episodes, you kind of have the hang of things. And so even that time, even if you choose to outsource after that point, you also now have expectations of this is how I want my work to be. And so I think with when you're starting a podcast, you really have to have like thick skin and like patience and strength, because you do have to learn a lot of new skills and I'm sure like small things, even me, I remember when I was starting, small things used to stress me, where you've worked so hard, maybe on a thumbnail, then when you go to post it, it's not fitting, some words have been cut out, or you've done your audio, and you're like, this audio is good, you post it, you're excited, you've put on your WhatsApp, and then someone is like, it's too low, and you're wondering, it sounded fine to me, but it's because probably you were listening to it on high volume, you know? And so there are a lot of technical things you'll need to learn in the beginning. And that's just like part of the journey. Remember in the beginning I said, yes, it's podcasting, but it's just another business. And so just like any other business, you kind of have to learn the motions of how this business works. Yeah. So that would be my advice to people.
Okay, I have 2 more questions after this one. I've just remembered. I have a question for myself.
Yes, please.
So in the podcast, we're recording and doing everything. It sounds fine when you listen to it earphones, whatever, headphones. Okay. But then someone was listening at an airport and then they said they couldn't hear the sound. Are there specific settings that you need to think about when you're recording on a mic that would help the sound be clear in different environments for the person listening?
So that person, they say they are not hearing because they're in the airport.
I don't know if it's, I think it's I don't know if it's
I do know airports tend to be louder.
Louder,
So
yeah. But what are the things that you can do so that your people are not listening at like max volume always?
Yeah.
Are there mic settings that you can look at and check that would ensure, like how you were saying for Zoom, ensure it's the highest audio quality? Is there a
Yeah.
version of that for mics?
I wouldn't say there's a version of that for mics. There's usually like a basic, like in terms of loudness, there's a decent type of loud. So you don't want your sound to clip or distort. That's what you never want from your microphone. But what I'd say is it will probably come to now post-production. And so what happens, usually when you edit, any editor who's here, there's something called limiting. I know it's a very technical word, but so basically what limiting does is it allows you to decide how loud the sound is, basically. And so if you go, and I'm sure even probably AfriPods has its own standard, but if you go and look at Spotify and Apple, they actually give a specific number of like how loud your podcast should be. And so for Spotify, you'd find it's -14, and I think for Apple, it's -16. It's called LUFS. So basically, it's just a loudness scale. And so what happens, you might record your podcast like this, but then when you go into post-production, maybe this podcast is -28. And so what you need to do is put on that Camini software, and it now lifts up your audio to the appropriate volume. And so what happens, if your audio is low, it's usually a bad thing. If your audio is high, what happens when you put them into the Spotifys and the Apples, they kind of normalize your audio back to the decent. So I'd always say, if you're able, just Google limiting or Google how to make my podcast louder, and it will give you a bit of guidance in terms of being able to raise that volume if it was too low.
Okay. Are there any emerging technologies that you've seen for podcasters to consider as they get into podcasting?
Wow. I mean, there's so much, depending on which part of podcasting you want to tackle. I think, from what I was mentioning earlier in terms of cleaning your audio, there's enough AI platforms for that. In terms of also being able to script, I think we know now there's so much of that allows you to script your content, or you can even pour in your ideas and it kind of helps you refine them. In terms of gear, my God, gear is so cheap nowadays. Guys are so lucky. Like you can easily do something decent with a 5K microphone. And trust me, if I had the chance to display, like sometimes I listen to microphones, one is worth 10K, one is worth 50K, and the listener has no idea what the difference in price is, especially if you add post-production. So I'd say it's the best time to be a podcaster. That's why there are so many also trash podcasts out there, because it's so easy to become a podcaster right now. It's true. It's so easy. Like
Not you calling them out.
You just get a mic for 5K. You can easily even get a camera for 20K if it's a second, and then you start your journey, And so what I'd say is right now is probably the best time in terms of technically to do a podcast, because there's a lot of things supporting that ecosystem. Even with the uploading, there's free uploading to most of these platforms. So really, apart from creating the content, you don't have an excuse in terms of, unless maybe you just don't feel you're up for it. But the ecosystem is there to support you in terms of doing podcasts. And even another thing, so there are a lot of, especially if you're doing video, there are so many new apps nowadays that even allow you to throw in your video, and it just gives you the short clips. Like you don't even have to look for short clips. It just gives you, hey, 8 short clips. We even put for you subtitles. Even if you want a thumbnail, we've given you. So, like, at best, what you need to do is kind of just produce the content, and there's enough AI and tech and websites that are there to support you with that podcast journey. Yep.
Okay, I'm about to ask you my last question.
Okay.
But I'm coming to you for questions.
Please.
Okay?
Yeah.
Ask all the questions that you have on technical things, because why? He's here for you, okay?
Yes.
But I always like to say, I love you, Kenyans. Mine is not a question, it's a comment. Not today, okay? We're only asking questions.
You
Agreed?
can't say
Mine is not a question, not today. You can tell him mine is not a question after. Agreed? Excellent. I love it. Thank you. Okay, my last question is
Nice.
what is, if you could give a piece of advice to someone who wants to start a podcast from your experience, from your knowledge, what would it be?
Well, I have to be honest. There are the stats on podcasts out there are not good. So, and even in my experience, most podcasters don't even reach 3 episodes. So if you've reached 3 episodes, congratulations. You're in the 20%. And for those who reach 3 episodes, let's say for the 90% who go past 3 episodes, of those 90%, again, 90% don't go past 20 episodes. And so when you're planning your podcast journey, if you don't have at least 10 episodes in the bank, just find another hobby. Let me be real. No, let me be real. Like, if you're planning I'll shoot a podcast today, then over the weekend, when I go CG, I'll think for my next. No. Like, don't do that. That will just, like, again, I'm telling you, it's a business. So you literally have to think, by the time you're planning on shooting, you're like, I want to do podcasts. Bare minimum, you must have 10 topics that you think are really good, are well-researched. If it's interviews, you've kind of talked to these guys, and you kind of have an idea. So that would be my first advice. Like, most people don't get to 20 episodes. And I was even talking to someone just before, and I was saying, of these 50 podcasts that I've shot, maybe 5 people are the ones who are still doing it. And that's the reality. So people will gas you up, podcasting, but you don't want a podcast that's just your family members, the house help, your grandmother who are listening to, and your work is getting 20 views on YouTube. Like, you'll do it, but again, as I said, it's an investment. And so the moment you're, let's say, okay, if you're doing it at home and you've invested in your mic, it's okay. But in the instance that you're paying a videographer or something to help you, and let's say you're spending, let's say even 20K a month, by the time you're doing this for 1 year, you've spent, maybe 100K, 120K, and you're getting 50 views. Like, you kind of have to. And another thing that's really important, apart from just having that consistency, is kind of just, again, thinking of it with that, having that. So you need to have the creative heart and you need to have the business heart when you're doing a podcast. And with the business heart, what you're basically thinking is you're doing adequate research on your niche. And I was telling someone, unfortunately, most Kenyans, and I think it was not Kenyans, most people just like low IQ content. And so the reality is, when you go to YouTube, and that's why you need to be very objective. When you go to YouTube, most podcasts that do well in Kenya, they just talk about all this nonsense that's going on. If it's things that are trending on Twitter, or if it's politics, or if it's the entertainment scene. And believe you me, those ones will do well. Or these ones, for example, of Lin Ngugi, I always call it trauma-based content. My father bet me up. People are willing to listen to those podcasts for 1 hour. Because, I don't know, I think there's a concept called ego depletion. So people sometimes just like hearing people's problems and being like, hey, my life is not so bad. And so those are the people that's most of the content. And I was even telling someone, like, most times when someone is coming from work, they do not want to be lectured. That's why people listen to low IQ content. You want things that are easy to digest. They'll make you laugh, they'll make you cry, but they're quite easy to digest. And so if you're doing, I'd say, more serious content, because they're kind of, I'd say maybe 3 tiers you can use. There's the entertainment bit, which is what I'm saying. Unfortunately, you can still entertain, but most entertainment is this kind of just basic, bare minimum content. There's the education aspect, so where you're kind of educating people. So maybe if it's finance or whatever. And then there's the inspiration. So, people who do inspiration will do really well also, because people are looking for hope, for inspiration, for encouragement, and also education does really well. But now you kind of have to be very keen in terms of how you relay that information. So in spite of doing inspiration and education, at the end of the day, people consume content to be entertained. So even if it's inspiration, you have to do it in an entertaining way. Even if it's education, you still have to do it in an entertaining way. Otherwise, there's this bar graph in YouTube called the hockey stick. And so what happens is People start watching, but it just goes straight down and flat sideways. So if you don't have entertainment value in your content, unfortunately, people will just check out. Yep.
Okay, it is your time to shine. Do we have questions? Okay. I would like to suggest, do we need them to stand up? Or they're fine? We need them stand? When you're asking your questions, please stand up. Let us know your name if you have a podcast. If you don't, it's fine. And then you can ask your question.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Yeah, so I'm Sant Mark, a creative entrepreneur, and these are my questions. How do you monetize? That is one. What are the tools and the platforms for video editing? That is two. How can I do stand-up comedy as a podcast? And maybe what I was hoping for, which maybe might not be possible, I wanted to see the cassette up for you instructing us on how to do a cassette up for the home-based podcasting. Like, this is the lappy, this is the smartphone, you insert here,
Okay.
Maybe you need this car. Is it a car video
We can
card?
see how we can
We
get
can
that.
try.
Yeah, so
can
that
try.
when I
can
go,
try.
I just get this thing, plug. Yeah,
So.
this is how you set up and all. Thank you.
Good. I think you should just keep him with the mic because those questions, you might need to remind me. Oh, good. Thank you. So how do you monetize? Very good question. I think, you're also from AfriPod. I think you have some perspective. You can tell me. But I think in Africa, it's very hard to monetize audio only. Because when you think about monetize, you're thinking maybe from your streams. Secondly, from advertisers and partners, right? And let's say for the streams, it kind of just depends on you growing your platform. So I wouldn't maybe touch on that because it means the bigger you are, the easier it is for you to monetize your streams. But for advertisers and partners, it's all about the numbers. And so the only way you can monetize is by growing your podcast to such a good number that you can be able to now leverage your listeners to advertisers and partners that matter to them. So, for example, for you, maybe you're saying it's a stand-up podcast, right? So it's probably maybe the general Kenyan. Let's say there's not a user specific who's listening to stand-up. And so for your case, what you'd be working towards to is the moment you get, say, let's say your podcast on YouTube is getting 10K views when you upload, you can sell anything. Of course, unfortunately, with the ad space, you'll tend to find maybe you're either partnering with a betting platform or you're partnering with a Shamba 50 by 100. But once you have the clout, and that's what influencers just do. So basically, a podcaster, you kind of become an influencer. And so at that stage where you have enough people you're influencing, you can actually leverage it for anything you want. So the main goal is actually to just grow your numbers to and that's why strategy is so important. Because as a creative, you might have cool ideas, but are these ideas gonna grow your numbers? So to you, it might sound cool, to your friend, it might sound cool, but do people actually care about this topic? And that's a hard lesson you really learn when you're beginning. But you're like, this was an interesting topic. But then when it gets 5 views, you're like, oh, maybe it wasn't so interesting. So I'd say that's kind of in monetization, the goal is to grow those numbers. Once their numbers are up, you can dictate your terms to any partner and they'll approach you.
Okay. My thoughts on monetization. Yes, numbers are important if you're doing a general podcast.
Yeah, okay.
If you're niched, your numbers don't matter as much because you're speaking to a very specific audience. And so even if you have 50 people, that 50 people is very important. So let's say I'm talking about photography. And I know every week I have 100 people who are interested in photography. Going to a company that sells cameras is easier for me than for someone who has 10,000 listeners every week because I have their target audience. I have exactly who will spend the money on them. And so I think it depends on how you set yourself up into what he mentioned earlier is that if you think of your podcast as a business, then you're able to consider, one, who are the people I want to approach to advertise, and how do I set myself up to be attractive to them? And I say that because I know someone in this here industry of ours. I think we spoke to her last year on the monetization PodConnect, and she had, I think, 200 subscribers when she got a brand, an alcohol brand in Kenya, to give them sponsorship. It's not the numbers in the way that you think that matters. So it depends on how you set up your numbers. What some companies have is maybe advertising, some have impact money. Is there a way you can show that you have impact and get the impact money instead of advertising money? Then you're not in the space where the influencers are. So if you can figure out how to position yourself and your podcast to attract certain people who are ready to spend money, then it makes it easier for you. Maybe you're talking about, say, women is something I would be able to cover. Say, women, education, things like that. You might be able to go to an NGO and get sponsorship. So monetization is truly and absolutely dependent on how you decide to approach your podcast and what it is you do, because that would determine whose money you're getting, and that determines who you're in competition with for getting the money. Okay.
I agree with what you're saying, but I'd just like to push back a little bit.
Sure.
And reason I'm saying that is what you're saying is very valid. Like, for example, with your niche, let's say you're focusing on women or maybe some social issues or something like that, then you can definitely, your numbers are not, they don't need to be 10K, as long as you can show a bit of impact and a bit of value. Maybe even it's an education platform, then, or maybe it's a financial education, then it's very easy to get, maybe somebody's offering some funding or some partnerships. But again, so the reason I say numbers are important, in the long game as a business, you see, you can choose to run your business using, I'd say maybe like grants or those niche partnerships, or maybe you're doing, for lack of a better word, what I'd call like DEI type of content, where people are willing to plug into your ecosystem, however small. But if you're growing it as a business, the only value most times, let's say an influencer has or a podcaster, your biggest asset is your numbers. So that's what I meant. So you can do that, but if you're growing, the more you're, and apart from even leveraging partnerships, numbers build credibility. So you can really do a lot of nice content, but even us subconsciously, if we click on YouTube, then we see 800 subscribers. Unless the content is really good, then you'll subscribe. But like seeing those numbers, even when you're seeing an influencer, you see 10K, you see 100K. Subconsciously, those numbers affect how viewers view your platform. And even for partners, if you're going to a partner with 200 subscribers, even if it's a good niche, they have more bargaining power, realistically. So they kind of tend to dictate the terms. But if you do have substantial numbers, then you can go into that room with a balanced view where they can say your terms, but you can also say, I'm bringing this to the table. So aside from just this niche, this is a platform that is growing and can give you, apart from just maybe impact, it can give you marketing and things like brand awareness and things like that. Yes, but what she says is totally valid.
Okay, his second question was video editing platforms.
So,
are there any you can suggest?
Yeah, so for video editing online, not many options, honestly, especially if you're doing long form. But what I'd suggest is, for example, DaVinci Resolve has a free version. And for the most part, works really well. I know Adobe and a few others are paid versions, so even Final Cut for Mac, they are paid. But DaVinci Resolve, if you go to their website, you just put your email, it's a free version, and the learning curve for basic editing is not bad. So my recommendation would be use DaVinci Resolve. Yep.
Okay, and he said, how do you do stand-up as a podcast?
So I'd go look at someone called Bill Barr. He's an American, I don't know if anyone of you know him, but he's an American stand-up comedian. And he does, I think, either one episode a week or 2 episodes a week with simple names, either like Friday night. But basically, no video actually. Just wakes up, records audio of himself just bantering, just talking. And again, as I said, with podcasts, and maybe I didn't mention this, but like you have to be interesting. Like if you're a boring person, like nobody will, and unfortunately, unless you can learn to be interesting through scripting and all that, but like if you're a boring person, nobody will tune in. As I told you, people listen to things either to be entertained, inspired, or educated. So if you're not fitting any of those bills, you might find it hard. But for the Bilba example I'm telling you, just go look at his YouTube. He literally just posts the audio with like maybe a picture of him and like the title, and then a good title describing maybe like the content. And of course, much later we can talk about like things which are really important, which are like your thumbnail and your title, which are so important. So if you want to monetize on YouTube, for anyone, not just for stand-up, I always used to tell Wangari when we were doing a podcast, you need to be able to see your thumbnail and title before you even record your podcast. And even a good test is to ask someone, here's my thumbnail and title, would you click on this? If they wouldn't, maybe then that topic is just not good enough. And you have to be not attached to topics. Like if you share with someone, 5 people, and they're like, then you just shelve it. And I think Mr. Beast gives a very good example. He says, if he uploads a video, and they do a lot of back testing where they share their thumbnails and titles in advance. And if you're not getting the right feedback, they just pick another video. Like you have to be that objective with yourself. Of course, when you're starting, I wouldn't say be too hard on yourself. Your first time you're focusing on consistency. But if you want to take it really to another level, be that objective. If your title and thumbnail are not giving, as Gen Z say, just drop it, look for another. So for Mr. Beast, even if he posts a video, he said if he doesn't get like a specific number of views in the first 24 hours, he removes it. And that's just being objective. Because again, subconsciously, if I go to your page and I'm seeing 10 views, 5 views, 8 views, unless I'm your mother, I'm not incentivized to come back to that page again. That's just the reality, right? And so you're always you're throwing things and seeing what will stick. And so just have that objectivity. Ask your friends, and friends who are real with you, not these yes people. Just friends will be like, bro, why would I click on that? Or like, this is a good topic. Yep, that's what I'd say.
Okay, but don't take down your podcast. You're not Mr. Beast yet. Okay.
Yeah, don't. Just as I said, when you start, focus on consistency. The rest will come later. Once you reach 20 episodes, you can audit, and I'll be like, what can I do better?
Okay. Another question.
Thank you for your questions.
Is there a mic? Oh, excellent. Please stand. Thank you.
Hi. So I had, I think 3 questions. So the first one was around the whole thing about doing video.
Sorry?
The first question was around doing video.
Okay, yep.
Encouraging video over audio.
Yes.
What if it's a technical topic? Is there any stats to show that, does it really matter? If it's more of a technical topic, will video do better or audio? That's the first question. The next one is, how do you bring entertainment into a technical topic? And then the third question was, do you have recommendations for platforms to automatically create clips? Like I can just upload my audio and I get clips.
Good. Thank you for your questions. So the first one of video versus audio debate, yeah? I'd push, so I do have responses, but I'd probably almost bring this question back to you. So I don't know if do you mind sharing like what your podcast is about, what you're calling technical, just like what it's about?
So my topic talks about MarTech, which is the intersection between marketing and technology. So we do talk about technical topics.
Okay, so I see what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So firstly, what I'd say in terms of, let me just talk about the technical aspects of it. I've seen so many videos on YouTube that can be so boring, but how you choose to relay that information can add so much value to it. So for example, you're talking about marketing and tech, right? So there's another channel I don't know if it's quit. I used to do videos for, it's called Orwa's Digest. And so for him, he did a video that has a marketing element with tech. And so he'd basically do something like how Arimis become so popular without marketing? Or how did Ajab, the guys who sell Ungaya Chapati, how did they how did they become so big? Like it's a 5-year-old company. How are they competing with X and those? And so it's kind of taking your topic and now scripting it in a way that you'll engage the viewer. And most of what really helps with that is context. So you see, for example, you can do a video of 5 ways to use, these are the 5 ways to use tech to optimize your marketing. And the other thumbnail is, this is how Ajab flour used tech to become the biggest flour brand in Kenya. And see, for someone, they'll probably click at the second video because you've contextualized the topic. And so I'd say nothing is boring. It's just how you relate, you know. And that's even the power of sometimes being a good orator, or being a good speaker, like, and even for guys who do stand-up. They can take such a simple concept, you know, of going to church on Sunday, but tell you in such an entertaining way, or maybe something about something they did with their wife, but they can translate that information in an so it's just about looking at your core viewer. Of course, I can understand if your target audience is maybe like technical people who want to know like the nitty-gritties and like the theories and all that. But with that, now you go back to what she said. Probably if you're doing the more technical things, then your niche is so small. And so if your niche is so small, it means even if you get 100 views, maybe those are the number of people who kind of, it's a good number, but those are people who want to listen into it. And so maybe using the podcast might not be the best avenue. So you might have a podcast, yes, but maybe what you need more is a website aligned with that podcast that is kind of educating people on these different strategies that you can use tech. So kind of you're using your podcast only to market, but it's not standing in isolation. But part in short would be just, there are very many creative ways you can put a spin on things. So things don't have to be boring and technical and things like that, yeah.
On choosing audio video, I'd also say consider your audience, consider their lifestyle, and consider your time. Do not do anything that you cannot keep up with, because the most important thing is consistency. So if you don't have time to do audio and video, pick one.
Or the budget.
Or the budget, yeah, because if you're not going to be, if one episode will be video, the next one not, just pick one.
Yeah.
Who's your audience? Because there's a conversation that was had around YouTube. There's a really big YouTube podcast that said because they do YouTube and audio, what happened is they realized as their audience gets older, they go towards audio. So depending on who your audience is and what their lifestyle is, will determine if you need to do video at all. Because do the tech people have time to sit and watch YouTube? If the answer is no, don't bother. Because then what you're doing is giving yourself extra work that your audience will not will not, there'll be no value for you. So it'll be the situation where you've spent so much money and time, and then you have your 10 views, if even, whereas you could have had 10,000 streams because that's who they listen as they go to work or they're in the office. So those are the considerations I think you should also put into place when you're considering video and audio.
Yeah, and I didn't speak on that, which was kind of your question. Again, so what I'd say, the question I'd push back to you is, even with Kenya, like, if you go and analyze in Spotify, I know it's a bit harder for podcasts, but how many Kenyan podcasts are getting 10,000 audio listens? You know, in my experience, with the little people I've managed to communicate to, very few are getting those numbers. You might find that a video has 100K views on YouTube, but has 1,000. And so, unfortunately, audio podcasts are a bit more of a niche thing, where I'd say it's for middle, upper class people who are going to gym, someone who's constantly maybe in the office. And so for most people, they tend to consume content on social media and YouTube. And I remember even when I was starting another channel of mine, anytime, even especially if it's audio, the only thing your mother even will ask you is, ukona YouTube? Link your YouTube iko wapi? So it's like, unfortunately, it's drilled in our psyche where YouTube is where most content is. And so for Spotify, it's a good platform, but in my personal experience, unless I guess you're a really good podcast, I don't think you'd be getting the numbers that you need to monetize on like Spotify. But again, as she said, it doesn't mean you don't upload there. And I mean, so as long as you're uploading on YouTube, just keep uploading on, and there are enough, I've forgotten the name, but there's a platform which just allows you to, it's called Audible, I forgot it. But there's a platform that allows you to post on all audio platforms automatically. I don't know
if your host is a good host, any host for your platform allows you to be on every platform using your RSS. So even
the RSS feed, yeah.
If you have your RSS feed, you should be everywhere. So
Oh,
I think,
fine.
if you have that. On numbers, if you want to do audio. I can't say anything on numbers, but there are people who are able to make money on numbers on audio only. From my experience as my podcast with my sisters, we were audio only. We were approached by a brand. We were not doing 10,000 streams. We didn't look for the brand. They looked for us. So your content, honestly, is the most important thing. Do what you can on whichever. If you want to do audio only, do audio only. The brands are there that will come to you. But don't let that be your focus. Let your content be your focus, because your content speaks for you and allows for the opportunities where the brands can be like, oh, that's someone we want to be in connection with. Even though, again, it might be your numbers are zero. There are brands who, because the thing about numbers is a lot of times people just think about streams, but there's a lot more you can consider when it comes to numbers, when it comes to podcasting. It's not just streams. Your consideration when it comes to analytics is where is your region. You might be able to reach people in a region that they're specifically interested in. So those are the considerations. Look at the people who you're trying to attract, find out what's important to them, and figure out how to turn your numbers towards that. Because a lot of the podcasts I know that have made money don't necessarily have what we call traditional numbers. They're not 10,000. They're not influencers. They're not known. But they have the people who are able to support them, and it's just based on how you position yourself. It's just like you're saying, a company. Think of how you position yourself and make yourself attractive, and then it'll make it easier. I didn't get your second question, but your third was recommendations for platforms for creating the social media videos.
Yeah, and just before I answer that, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
So I know sometimes I might sound maybe a bit negative, but I'm just I agree with what you're saying, but in all honesty, I don't know. What I'd say is what you're saying is true, and there are podcasts which actually don't have just 1,000. You can 500, and you can be able to monetize. But what I want you to have as a podcaster is that self-awareness to know that, unfortunately, that's the exception. That's not the norm. So I wouldn't say of all podcasts in Kenya, 70% are landing deals or anything like that. So it does happen, but the truth of the matter is it is the exception. And again, maybe it's a mixture of not only you having your podcast, but also maybe knowing how to network, knowing how to be in the right places, in the right circles, which can now lead you to getting these partnerships. But when you begin, the reason I'm saying numbers is that's what you're most in control of on your own, in isolation. And so, I mean, if you have a good niche, as we said, if it's maybe like very social issues and topics like that, you might be able to get support early on in your journey. But for the most part, you really have to sink your teeth in and kind of work for those partnerships. And most times, to be able to even be given an ear, unfortunately, you do have to have something to show. And most times, what you'll have to show is the numbers. And the numbers don't have to be high, as she said. Actually, you might have, let's say you have 1,000 streams, but if you can show, I have 1,000 streams and I have 70% retention, like people who listen to my podcast till the last 10 minutes, that's a very good metric to go and negotiate. Because there are many people who have podcasts and they might have 100K views, but people listen only the first 5 minutes and check out. Yeah, so just wanted to add that. Then
your second question,
the last question was, so for example, a good one is so it's vidyo.ai. And there are a few others. That's the main one that I use because it had a free version. Most of the others are paid, and they do those scammy things where once you're done with your videos, they're like, pay first. Then you're like, I just wasted 30 minutes of my life. But vidyo.ai has a free version, though the quality is a bit lower. But if you're being serious, the price wasn't so bad, but it actually gives you like 8 social media clips, and it can help you choose like aspect ratios of like the different social media platforms. So that's the one I'd recommend, vidyo.ai. Yeah.
What was your second question? Sorry. Did
Have
we
I
answer
answered
your
all of them?
second question?
Oh, he answered all of them.
Okay,
Okay,
perfect.
super.
Yeah. But I
Thank you
wanted
for your
to
question.
ask a follow-up on that video.ai. Is this the one that creates clips, like audio clips? Because my podcast is 100% audio.
Or you just want audio?
Yeah.
Headliner. Headliner is a good,
Yeah.
because it allows you to put in the audio and create like
But I don't know if it automatically, does it automatically?
graphics.
So what you can do for video.ai, okay, maybe it just takes video, but what you can do is like just upload a video format, then at least it will give you the timestamps. So instead of having to look for like the different segmentations, it already tells you minute 2 to minute 8. And so now you just go, and that's kind of like a workaround. But for audio only, actually not quite sure, but I can research and get back to you. Thank you for your questions.
So I have a question for you just around numbers. You mentioned revenue and podcasters making money, audio podcasters. I'm just really curious on like, what's the revenue looking at? Is it like something that you can say is a career and, can actually pay?
I think for some people it is, but a lot of podcasters, like we mentioned, do podcasting as a hobby.
An expensive hobby.
Yeah, it's very expensive. So I think it depends on how much who you're able to approach. Right.
That's the whole reason you start podcasts, to put your opinion and your voice and your authenticity out there. I just think some brands will really try and water that down and say, oh, you can't talk about that. If you're sponsored by you should not say that. So that's just curious around, that.
So this is based on a conversation we had on monetization last year with Leili. And what she said is, I guess it goes into what we're talking about, is if you think of your podcast as a brand, if you think of it as a business, then it allows you to establish even who you're approaching, because then the people who you're interested in approaching to advertise, or the people who you'll say yes to, are people who align with what it is you do as a brand. So therefore, it makes it harder for the people who are giving you the money to dictate it. So unfortunately, or fortunately, what you have to think of yourself as is like, if you're a media house and you have the knowledge of what your audience wants and what is important to them, are you okay saying no is the most important? Because a lot of people, all money is not good money for your audience. So you might need to be able to say no because it doesn't align with what it is you have. Is the money there? Yes. But then how you have set yourself up and who you attract and what your brand is about will determine a lot of what you're able to do in that sector. So, for example, I think we talked about it. If you're talking about, there are certain things that it's easy to get money for. So if you're talking about education, if you're talking about women issues, there's a lot of places you can likely get money. But then is there a way that you can set your podcast up that it might be attractive to, so for you, for tech, for example, is there a way that you can do your tech podcast that attracts tech companies to want to come in and talk about their product, but it aligns with how it is you do your podcast, right? So you're not devaluing what it is you're giving your audience, you're not changing how you're doing your thing, but then there's value to them based on who it is your audience is and what it is your topics are. So how do you position yourself in your podcast that allows you in tech? Is there funding maybe in tech that you can, it will still allow you to talk how you want, like whatever language you want to use, they won't dictate anything. Because sometimes what happens in podcasting, you have silence sponsors, so they'll give you the money because it allows them to do something. If you're doing video, it might be just having like something you can have something on your setup that allows people to know about it or mention it. So it really is up to how you determine, like how you draw out your podcast or how you build it, which will allow you to determine who you can approach and how you can establish yourself, but you have to be ready to say no.
So I guess what I'm understanding is like you're coming from an approach of partnering with brands versus trying to build something on your own that, you know, like say on YouTube, if my video blew up and I got 1 million views and I had ads in there, I'm automatically get paid. I don't get, YouTube decides what ads are coming in. Whether it's, if I approach Safaricom, they'd be like, nah. But it's funny, like YouTube will put Safaricom ads in my video. So I guess like, I think it's two different approaches. You can either go to a brand or try and build a platform so big that brands have to place ads in your content, which I think is...
So if you want to do it that way, what I would advise is, I think something he said is figure out how to own it. So do you have a website? Do you have a newsletter that you can send people to? Patreon is a good platform that some people give them extra content. There was a conversation with Zambian podcasters where some of them are getting money on Patreon. You're just doing an extra Zoom or something like that with your audience, but they're able to give you like $5 a month or something like that. If you've built your audience to a certain level, then you're able to make money that way. A lot of the podcasts I know that are making money on their own will use platforms like Patreon. Figure out your newsletter, because then you have ownership of, if social media tomorrow crashes, the way the States didn't have TikTok one day, then do you have access to your audience? So it's figuring out how to own your audience and have access to them outside of the platforms, outside of the everything that allows you to then monetize. Is it having a live show? It might be, if it's tech, you get someone in and you guys play around with like different platforms or things in an afternoon, all of you together discussing something, but you pay for it. Then you're able to make money on your own without having to bring anyone in. But then when you've established those platforms, you're able to now then, as you're saying, decide who it is who comes in. If it's your website, you can decide who it is who can advertise on your website. If it's your newsletter, you can decide if you want to sell advertising on your newsletter. So there is ways to be able to do that as an individual as well. But the most important thing in that sense would be creating your community and owning it. So how do you establish who your community is? How do you get feedback from them? How do you communicate with them? Because once you have that, those are the numbers that then become important for everything else on monetization.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's kind of the main debate. And for me, again, I'd lean, because as she's saying, I think most times when you're starting a podcast, you're also doing it as a creative outlet, like you're passionate about this type of information and things like that. And so what I'd say, and even probably if you look up to different podcasters, most of them, the reason they're so big is because, for lack of they just grew their platform. And so the only downside I feel of like maybe doing these niche topics where you can get partners or funding and things like that is, what happens when your podcast has been so reliant on these partners and they just check out? And so ideally, and it's even, I'd bring the same example to like a startup or any other business. Like if your business is so reliable on grants and like funding and things like that, when those things check out, let's say for example, you are doing a HIV podcast and then USAID was funding all your episodes. Then now this happens, USAID closes. So your dream is dead, you know? And so it's an extreme scenario where I'm like, well and good if you can get it, but deep down, you're not building a sustainable business with it. But the beauty of now building your platform, as we are saying, first of all, especially with like YouTube, you actually, the moment you get monetized, however little, if your video does well, if content does well, you get money. Even if it's audio, same thing. If something goes viral and it's audio, you'll get your money's worth. And then when it comes to brands, the moment you have the numbers, you have bargaining power. And so most times in the beginning, I mean, even if you look at, if it's this big Joe Rogan podcast or Diary of a CEO and all of those things, sometimes you find that most times you're willing to say no to a brand, and a brand has no choice but to say yes to you because you have the right numbers. But so in as long as you're having low numbers, I don't want to use this. This word might sound a bit extreme, but you can end up feel like you're almost begging for money now, which is, I don't think it's a good situation to be in. So it's okay if you get that money to begin with, but deep down always know you don't want that to be the core of your podcast where you're being given like grants. Because this means, as you said, even sometimes guys just give you money because they have to tick it, that they supported initiatives that are helping, which is okay. It can help you kind of raise your podcast, but that shouldn't be your base because it can set you up in a situation that you might regret.
True. There's another question I saw. Or two more questions, and then I think we're done.
So, hi everyone. Thank you for that talk. It was very interesting. I'm a career content creator, so I already post content, but on TikTok, Instagram. And now I want to start my podcast. And I would like to know, because I don't know how this platform works, so how to massively distribute audio podcast. Because I can leverage now on my audience to grow my YouTube, like the video podcasts, but the audio one, I'm just so lost.
I think you can.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'd say pick a hosting platform that allows you to distribute. So that allows you to have an RSS. AfriPods is an example. Spotify is also one. I think it's dependent on what is important to you for your audience, but ensure you're able to have an RSS, that you own your own content, because some platforms in their terms and conditions are a bit fishy. So make sure you own your own content, have your RSS and distribute it to every platform that is available for audio. The thing we've learned about the behavior of listeners as an audience for podcasts is if they like a certain platform, they're not likely to download another one just to listen to your podcast. So ensure you're on every available platform. Make sure you have your CTAs in place. Listen on and all of these things, because again, a lot of people don't consider that. So let them know where they can listen. A consideration you need to have is at the beginning, how much money are you willing to spend? Because some hosting platforms charge at the beginning, some are free. So what is it that you want to do? What do they give you as a benefit of whatever you're paying for or not? Statistics are important as well. So figure out what statistics you want based on what you want to sell, if you want to sell in the future, or what you think is important for you, and use that to determine and do some research on what statistics are available on the hosting platform. Because what it does is it aggregates the statistics from every other listening platform for you, so then you're able to figure out exactly specific things from everything. So research your hosting platform, and based on what you need from that, you're able to then determine everything else. But make sure it has an RSS. And if you want a free hosting platform, AfriPods. Shameless plug.
Yeah, I think I'd say the same thing. There's a specific one I used to use. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name because clearly I don't upload audios to podcasts. But it's really good, and essentially what it does is also allows you to upload like your thumbnail, like your cover art for your podcast, and essentially what it, maybe in a day or two, it spreads it to all the relevant audio platforms, Apple, Spotify, and all that, and also gives you the RSS feed. So you need to upload it somewhere, then it generates for you.
Yeah, so just pick a hosting platform, one, that distributes everywhere. Yeah, that distributes everywhere. And then what happens is you upload to the hosting platform, it distributes. So once you put it on, say, AfriPods, then it goes to Spotify, Apple, Podbean, or wherever it is you want it to be. And then when you're checking your statistics, again, you come to AfriPods, check your statistics, because it aggregates them from every available platform, and you're able to download it from there directly. I saw one more question, and then... Hold on.
How to grow.
People to know
How to
that
grow
I
it?
have this podcast, like, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so if it's growing, I think the platforms that you have for social media, a lot of people are using social media primarily. Is that what you mean?
She's already on TikTok.
So that's what I'm
you
saying.
have a following on social media,
Yes.
and you want to see how you can now kind of transfer that to your podcast, right?
Because I think the easiest for me maybe will be to direct them towards YouTube. So I don't know how to, like, for you having a podcast.
How to do
you
that.
get people to know that you have a podcast? I mean, TikTok really helps.
So what you do is you can put clips
So we
of
need to-
put clips of your podcast on your TikTok, and then let them be like to watch the rest. So it's like putting the teaser on your platforms that you have that exist, and then that will, in your caption or whatever it is, lead them back to where it is you have the long form content.
So just hooks. So looking for
hooks, exactly.
the quote unquote clickbait parts of your podcast or the hooks where people will be like, okay, I want to know how this story ended. Then just making sure you have an organized linking platform. If it's Linktree, that kind of now gives access to YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and
to
all of
everywhere
those.
it is. The last question.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Mike. I'm not a podcaster, but I do live streaming and video production. So I produce content for podcasters. So I have 3 questions. The first one, what's the ideal posting frequency? How many times, maybe a day, a week? And the second question is, what's the ideal length of a podcast? Because some that are long, they perform well. Others are long, they don't perform well. So what's the ideal length? And the last question is about copyright issues. The moment you start working with brands, how do you navigate around copyright?
Super. Thank you for your questions. I think with the first one, which was posting frequency.
Yeah.
Yes. So for that, I think it's really subjective. What I'd say is whichever frequency you put, like, you need to be consistent with it. But again, in all honesty, I'd say, again, when you're starting, it's fine. Consistency is key. But as you grow, I'd say quality starts taking priority. So there's no point uploading poor performing videos consistently. So you'd rather work on one good video and post it up, and it gives you the mileage that you need, rather than upload 2 videos a week and they're giving you 100 to 200 views. And so ideally for most of my clients, what I like doing for the Kenyan market is I post usually from Wednesday going forward. Because most times, and again, in terms of time, I like posting in the evening. Evening because that's when most times people are watching, people are coming from work, somebody's in the office lazing about. That's the time they might click on your video. And so most times 9 a.m. people are busy, people are running, people are in transport. So you'll find that if you're looking for that initial kick to your video, most times in my experience, posting in the evening helps. In terms of frequency, when you're starting out, I'd say just do once a week. I think once you really have the demand and people actually like, when's the next episode, then that's when you can try do 2. But even for most big channels, they do once a week. And if you're a really big channel, you can even do 2 videos a month. But so when you're starting, I'd say just start once a week, then post most times. Sweet spot, Friday. Because if you post on Friday, if your content catches on, people can watch throughout the weekend and you can get good views. Yep.
On frequency, my standard answer is what can you handle comfortably? Because consistency is key. So I know people who do it once a month. I know people who do it every fortnight. Whatever you can handle. Just know if you say every week Tuesday at 5 or every week Friday at 5, every week Friday at 5, let there be an episode. If you can't handle that, do it every first Friday at 5. Then it's fine. Because the idea behind your audience is they form a behavior around what it is you do. So whatever your consistency is, they form a behavior around it. So you determine that. Okay, ideal length. Do you have one?
Ideal length. Again, I don't want to sound mean, but if it's low IQ content, you can do as long as you want. And by low IQ, I don't mean like it's bad content, but like content that's easy to digest. So for example, if it's this kind of trending type of news, politics, I've seen even the other day I was seeing a podcast by this Cairo guy, and it's 4 hours long. And people are willing to watch 4 hours, 40 minutes long. But that guy knows very well that people will, because it's a trending topic. But if it's something that's very targeted, so for example, you're saying something very technical, honestly, nowadays my rule is 15 minutes. It might sound a little, but that's the most you can hold someone's attention. And that's not just talking, you're trying to engage them. Again, it's also different if it's a podcast that has more than one person. Because now with 2 or 3 people, the different personalities can help keep the conversation going. If it's debate, if it's arguing, if it's back and forth questions, that goes a long way. The key thing you have to think about, especially as an editor, is retention. Like that is your gospel truth. So anytime, even for me as I'm editing, I'm always like, after every 1 or 2 minutes, something must be happening in the video to keep the viewer engaged. Otherwise, they'll check their phone, kidogo kidogo, they've stopped watching the video. So every 2, and it sounds crazy, but if every 2 minutes there is a trigger for your audience, they'll watch through all of it. But if that's not the case, you'll find you might do a 40-minute video. And for most people, you do a 40-minute video, you see on YouTube, it gives you stats, people watched for 3 minutes maximum. And so what that does show you, your video has 0 retention. And so that's what I'd say, just focus on retention. And so if you're starting a podcast, let's say it's a long-form podcast, I'd say maybe try 30 minutes. I know 15 minutes sounds extreme, but if it's a conversational like group, try 30, 45. In my experience, it's okay, but it needs to be really interesting. If it's not interesting, people won't watch. And so if you can summarize what you are to do in 40 minutes in 20, the better for them. The listener doesn't want, I told you, they want to be lectured, they don't want to be kept waiting. Imagine if an episode on Netflix is 40 minutes and it was just someone on screen talking, would you watch? You see, there are so many things happening, sound effects, scene changes, music, all these things are what are allowing you to watch that episode and focus on it because you're being engaged. Every 30 seconds, every 1 minute, cameras are changing, music is changing, sound effects are there. So I'd say 30 minutes for long form. If you're alone, 15 minutes, even 10. Find a way to summarize your content.
Research your niche and find out what other people are doing in that space as well. Yeah. Additionally.
Yeah, of course. But most times, go and look on YouTube. The most Kenyan content that people watch that do well,
it's short.
It's short form, and if it's long form, it's Sijui Raila did what, it's Sijui Cairo did what, it's Sijui watch this and you'll be shocked. It's BNN, so unfortunately, if that's your type of content, my God, you can do an hour interview and it works. Lin Ngugi, again, does those kind of extreme videos which are like triggering titles or my sponsors and what. Those videos will do well 2 hours because guys like but guys like that type of content. But if you're busy telling people there how to monetize your app using tech and you're talking for 1 hour, or you're talking to a CEO, unless the CEO is really successful, people won't care. Even with this content, unfortunately, right? Like what can do well is the snippets, right? But if someone was watching online, there are not enough triggers, or I'm not quote unquote big enough for them to focus their attention on me for 2 hours. And that's just the reality. And so as an editor or even as a podcaster, you need to be so honest with yourself. You need to be acceptable. Like, hey, this is garbage. I need to redo it. Or people will not listen to this. Or you can see people are not listening to this. You don't be attached to topics. Just move on. Just accept and be like, okay, that doesn't work. Keep it moving.
Copyright was the last question.
So copyright, we're working with brands, right? I'd say as an editor, there are 2 things you need to do. So first of all, if you don't want copyright issues with regards to music and videos, so like for me, I do subscribe to paid platforms where once I've paid a subscription, I have rights to copyright to the content I use. So if it's the B-roll videos, drone shots on what, or the music or sound effects, even if I get a copyright notification, I do have the copyright by virtue. So I'm not stealing any content. I'm actually paying So things like Envato, audio blocks. So these platforms that offer you content but you have to pay for are what I'd say you'd go for. Otherwise, you'd find that maybe, and again, the simplest thing you can also do, because there's also the concept of right of use when you're doing content. The easiest thing you can always do is also credit. So credit in your captions, in your description, credit if you used maybe video from somewhere, credit it. If you feel like you used a big chunk, go as far as emailing them and asking them, is it okay if I used your video? And again, you can put a disclaimer there where you're like, if I used your content and you have any issues, please reach out to us. Don't strike our content down. So just having the formalities put in check will go a long way into making sure you don't have issues with brands. But go-to is just pay for those platforms like Envato. My favorite is Envato, which gives you copyright of most media.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. I know there's one more question. Is it okay if you see him on the side? So, excellent. Thank you for being here. Please let us know where we can find you. Tell us a bit about your production company as well.
If you need to find me, my website is honeypod.com. So hanipod.com. If you want to look for me online, you'll still find Honeypod. So Honeypod KE. I think if you just search that, you'll find me. I used to have a personal social media page. I got hacked, but since I'm doing talks now, I might just open it again. But if you look for me on LinkedIn, I'm called Nabiswa Wanyama. So just search for me on LinkedIn and you'll be able to find me. And also Honeypod. If you search Honeypod, you'll be able to also reach me.
Excellent. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you for making the time to be here as well. I have been your host. My name is Gathoni. I work with AfriPods, which is a podcast hosting and distribution platform. Check us out, afripods.africa. We offer free hosting. You can follow us on all social media platforms at AfriPods. My personal profile is Podcasting in Africa on all social media, so you can follow me there as well. Special thanks to Semabox for giving us the technical backing, and for Baraza for being the best host in the entire world. Thank you so very much for making the time to be here. We have a photographer called Maine. He's there. I always say he's the guy with the connecting beard. So please make sure that you take pictures. And yeah, it's really nice to have you guys here. We'll have another one in May. So please check out AfriPods and Baraza. You'll be able to get the details there. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, and thanks for hosting. You are a very good host.
Thank you.
Thanks for the questions and attending. And the last thing I tell all podcasters is this: like, your work begins when you stop recording. Like, that's when the work begins. So people just assume the recording is the hard part, but the hard part is actually the marketing. And most brands will tell you, like, you might have the best content, but if you're not marketing it or the content itself is not pushing itself, you'll just be frustrated. So the work begins when you actually stop recording. And all the best.
And now we stop recording, so our work begins. Thank you, guys.